working on planting this rain garden that we started earlier this season. When we began, the site was covered with Bermuda grass, which we removed with a sod cutter. We then dug out the pools of our rain garden and built up the berms along the edge. We opted to leave the rain garden fallow throughout the summer to provide an opportunity to manage any Bermuda grass that remained in the site. But now that the fall weather's here and it's cooling off, we're ready to start planting. Now, as you look at the rain garden, you can see there's a variety of conditions here, and we want to make sure when we're planting it that we're selecting plants for the varied conditions. So the edge is raised, and of course the berms are raised, and they're going to dry out very quickly. So we want some really drought-tolerant plants up there. The lower areas is where the water pools, so we want plants here that actually adapt to fluctuations in water levels. A rain garden is not always wet. It goes through periods of wet followed by dry. So after a rainfall event, the soil might be saturated for around 24 hours. But between rainfall, it can dry out, if not supplemented with irrigation. So we look for plants that can naturally adapt to these fluctuations in water. And many of our native plants actually provide a great solution to that, particularly if we look at habitats that have fluctuations in water, such as a floodplain area. Native plants tend to be a little bit better adapted than our bred plants, our cultivars and such, because those cultivars during the breeding selection process are pretty well pampered, and so they don't have to go through these fluctuations in moisture. As with any garden, when we're designing, we want to think about providing a variety of forms and textures and sizes in our plants, and we want to use trees, shrubs, and herbaceous plants in our rain garden. Let's start with trees. This river birch was actually in the site before we installed the rain garden, and it was decided to build the rain garden around it because it's very tolerant and actually will do quite well with the periodically saturated soils. Some other trees that would do very well would be bald cypress or pond cypress and the willows. We don't want to forget shrubs because they provide a lot of good form. They also will have structure in the winter and color. Plants like the buttonbush or the American beautyberry would work very well. In fact, the buttonbush is native to along the drainage patterns and creeks that run through prairies, so they're used to that having periods of moisture. I often kind of lump our Amsonia in with the shrubs because of its size, but it is an herbaceous plant, but it'll grow to a very nice rounded shrub, and this fine texture of the foliage really works well to set off other plants around it. Grasses and sedges and rushes also do very well in the rain garden. Now, when you're selecting grasses, you want to consider kind of their native habitat. Grasses have different adaptations to moisture. This is a switchgrass, which can tolerate a bit more moisture than, say, our bluegrass. We actually have some little blue stem in here, but we planted that up on the berm because it's a prairie grass. If it gets too much water, it doesn't die, it just grows really tall and flops over because it's not used to having that much moisture. Some of our non-native grasses like the miscanthus also do well, and also feather reed grass. Now, when we're selecting our plants, especially our herbaceous plants in the rain garden, we want to think about having season-long color. The Amsonia blooms in the springtime. We also have other spring bloomers like our Baptisia. This is a fall bloomer. This is an aster. We can also put solidago or goldenrod in for fall color. Remember, just like any garden, we want it to look good all year long. Another nice tip from a design standpoint is to plant some of the same plants we have in other parts of the landscape here in our rain garden to provide a continuity between it and the surrounding landscape. Now, I mentioned the bermed areas dry out quickly, and so we want to find some drought-tolerant plants to put up there. Of course, our ground cover sedums work very well. The homeowner here selected this site to put a hedgehog cactus, which is a really unique, interesting plant, but it works so well here because it's bermed and it drains very quickly. It also has the rock around it, which just sets it off, provides a nice support for that plant. So you can get very creative in your plant selections. Now when it comes to planting in your rain garden, we're going to plant this just like any other garden. We want to set our plants so that the crown is level with the surrounding soil. And we want to dig a nice wide hole, just as we would in our other gardens. We want the hole to be about 2 to 3 times the width of our plant. Okay, once you have a fairly wide hole, and again, make sure it's the proper depth for your plant, loosen up any roots that might be circling so that they don't keep wrapping but spread out in our garden. And then just gently tap the soil back in around it. Now, we want to use mulch around our plants in the rain garden, just as we would in other gardens, and mulch will help keep the soil moisture in. It'll also help us combat weeds. We're going to have to weed this garden pretty heavily in the first year because the plants are still small and there's a lot of space in between it. But after a couple of years, as the plants mature and fill out, we're going to not have to weed quite as much in here. The plants will just naturally compete against the weeds. Now, I'm using a bark mulch, which works fine, but will float a little bit in the water. You can try shredded bark, which actually kind of weaves itself together and stays put. With the bark here, what we've done on the overflow of the rain garden is used a small gravel, and that won't wash off, so that'll stay put. This part will drain over here, and so the rocks will stay put where the water's flowing over. So we don't have to worry too much about our bark floating off. Now, even though we have plants here that are fairly well drought tolerant, we do need to water them well as they establish over the first 2 seasons. They'll need about 1 inch of water a week, given in 2 different waterings, so 1/2 inch twice a week if you don't get adequate rainfall. Even once they're established, they can't live through extreme drought. So if the rains don't come, if you're in a period of drought, you'll want to give the plants a little bit of supplemental irrigation. The rain garden provides such wonderful opportunity to be creative and select plants for some very unique habitat. So I would encourage you to just have fun and be creative in your design. Project Blue Thumb has lists of rain garden plants for sun and shade. You can find these and other excellent resources at lid.okstate.edu.